Great. So again, hello, welcome and thank you for joining us in celebrating John Mills's poetry pamphlet, No Guiding Star. I'm Nadia Kingsley. I run Acre Press. I had the genius idea of asking John if I could publish him back in May or June of this year, 2020. John and I are so delighted and humbled that we're joined today by the wonderful poets Helen Mort, James Sheard and Clare Shaw. These three poets have not only been kind enough to both read and then endorse No Guiding Star, they have turned up today. And as well as reading one of their own poems, they've also agreed to read one of John's poems to us. I can't wait. Thank you so much. So here is our running order. In a moment, I will ask John to read a poem from his pamphlet, and he will also read a poem in between each of our special guests. John will introduce each guest poet, and then he'll read one of his poems at the end of the reading as well. Then I'm going to ask him a few questions. Helen, Jim and Claire may also be joining me in that conversation. Then I'll ask John to read one final poem. So with no further ado, I would like to ask John Mills to step up to the microphone and share one of his poems with us.
And remarkably, I've remembered to unmute myself.
Yay!
Which is always a good start. Well, thank you everyone for being here. I'm overwhelmed by this. And I'm also overwhelmed that Jim, Helen and Claire have agreed to join us this afternoon, because all three of them have very significantly had an impact on my poetry life. I'm going to start with a poem called Conjunction, which is the first one in the pamphlet. Conjunction. In the beginning was the verb, and the verb was shake. I shake, you shake, he spills his food. I stare, you stare, he shakes. Like Lear, he is undone by a button. I fasten, you fasten, he can't. His fumbling is comical. I laugh, you laugh, he cries. And I'd like now to hand over to Helen Mort, who's done so much for me over the years. And Helen is going to read one of my poems. You can introduce it yourself, and one of her poems. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Helen Mort.
Thanks, John. Thanks, Nadia. I think I've remembered to unmute myself as well, so hopefully you can all hear me. It's such a privilege to be here today. And it's so exciting to see all of you and feel part of a poetry community again for the first time in ages. Also, it's just so wonderful to get a chance to celebrate John's brilliant work, which I first discovered in Chesterfield many years ago when he came to read at Spirerites, and I got to know John and Liz, and this is just truly brilliant collection of poems, so I'm honoured to be able to read one of them. I found it very hard to choose which poem of John's I was going to read, and in the end I went for a piece called Dress Rehearsal, which has as its subject something happening in Sheffield at Leppings Lane and Hillsborough. Dress rehearsal. The unconscious were passed over our heads, our hands on their bodies like navvies footing narrowboats, until the throng pinned our arms to our sides. A bloke next to me got his lighter out but couldn't get his fags. I gave him one of mine, one drag and it burnt away in my hand. An impulse whipped the crowd sideways and we were snatched away, swept back and thrown forward, with nothing to hold on to but our wits. Ribs and nerves cracked against the safety barrier, plucked from the ground and propelled backwards. You do anything to avoid the consequences of going down. And in a postscript to the poem, John has written Leppings Lane, Hillsborough, March 27th, 1971, Stoke versus Arsenal, FA Cup semi-final, and dress rehearsal. And it's hard to know what to follow a powerful poem like that with. I'm going to follow it with something entirely stupid. That seems like the only way I can go. So a complete change of tone. I'm going to read a piece of my own, which is called Difficult. It does mention running in there, and John has been a huge source of inspiration to me as a runner and as an athlete, as well as a poet. So, but I'm sure he wouldn't endorse the views in the epigraph to this poem, which came from the askmen.com guide to why men date difficult women. And it just says this: God knows there are difficult women out there, women who are at times shallow, bitchy, selfish, dishonest, and of course, crazy. And I've long been interested in this phrase, the difficult woman, and how it was used as if it was referring to a species of butterfly or moth that we would all recognise. So this was my response to the quote. Difficult. Difficult women don't care what time it is. They're crowding the bus stop with their difficult bodies, refusing to budge for the light, or in the parks, dragging their difficulty behind them like a fat dog. Some of them are running, cycling, or worse, driving cars. If a difficult woman hits you at 30 miles per hour, you have a 50% chance of survival. At home, difficult women are more like walls than windows, but if you lean on one, you fall straight through, and sometimes at night they show your face. Difficult women don't know they're born. Difficult women don't know the meaning of the word. There could be one folded into your newspaper, holding her breasts like oranges. There might be one carrying your coffee or moving to your road. In London, it's said you're never more than 6 feet from a difficult woman. Have you or a colleague had a difficult woman in the last 6 months? If so, you may be entitled to compensation. Do you have difficulty with our questions? Are you afraid you may be difficult yourself? Thanks so much, John, and I hope that No Guiding Star has all the success that it deserves in the world, because it's fantastic. I think you're on mute, John.
Oh, I've done it. I'm unmuted. Thank you, Helen. That was superb. Thank you very much. That's one of my favourite of your poems. I'm really pleased you picked up on that. I'm going to read Brief Encounter now. It's a poem which goes back over 40 years. It recalls an incident that happened then. Brief Encounter. We shared a table in a bus station coffee bar. Me in Levi's and Ben Sherman. She was worn like a cardigan, and her cardigan was the colour and flavour of her cigarettes. I don't recall her asking. She just sat down and said, "He comes out tomorrow." Outside, toing and froing, buses and people weaved intricate patterns of arrivals and departures. "Oh," I said. "He looks after me. Then he runs me." She bared the seared forearms on the inside of her forearm. He did this with an iron. Jim has been a fantastic influence on me and my poetry. Somehow he's got the capacity to say one or two words which think, yeah. Why didn't I think of that before? Something on the lines of "look at the verbs" or something like that. And you think, that is so bloody obvious. Why didn't anyone else think of it? Jim, I know which poem you're going to read of mine, but I'd like you to introduce it and to introduce one of your own. Ladies and gentlemen, Jim Sheard.
Thanks, John. Everyone hear me? Okay. Yeah. Okay. Great. Congratulations, John. First thing, it's a book launch. Great thing. Always a happy moment for everybody. I've chosen to read your poem "Conspiracy of Silence," which is one of those poems that I think we really recognise the moment of we're out traveling somewhere, we stop, we look at something, and we realize the significance of it. It's almost like a sort of routine thing that poets experience, and but it's how you then deal with it afterwards, the extent to which you don't make it too fussy, the way that you don't put too much of yourself into it, that you somehow find the thing you're looking for. It's set in Spain, contemplating the memorialized dead and the unmemorialized dead. And it also has something in there about the way that things can go badly wrong when societies are being divided, as ours is at present. Conspiracy of silence. The heat lies heavy on a small cemetery, isolated high in the Sierra Nevada. A vulture saunters the sky. A single goat scrubs what it can from this land terse in its attitude to vegetation. Before us, gaudy with Republican ostentation, a gravestone bears the legend, fallen for God and Spain, and for Spain. God, it appears, takes sides, and the losers lie deep. Education, politics, a whim, has given them comradeship beneath the earth. We gaze east across fields of wind turbines and contemplate how many more we overlook. My own poem, I had some sort of struggle thinking about what the best thing to do was. And you're at that moment where the world has briefly in the right place. You've got a collection out, it's the launch. If you imagine running up a seesaw, you're at the point when the seesaw begins to tilt. Nice moment. Some of us, however, are right at the other end of that thing. We're still thinking about whether we're ever going to write again and whether a book is going to come out. And I have a poem here which tries to get that idea. It's called The Book is Stirring. The book is stirring below the still surface, down past the movements of weeds and the shelving. It is stirring in the trench, in the deepest parts. And I would think of it as whole, a shadowy, monstrous thing, articulated and ready, but know that it was once that, is no longer that, and only might be that again. For now, it is broken up, and each crusted fragment has only just begun to draw things towards it, utterances and rhythms, scraps of images, all the detritus of my listening self. The drawing happens here, happens there, each one the intimation of a text, and oh, how the text may become a whole, and each fuse to each and become a scripture. And in thinking of scripture, the book itself begins to think of all that a book might be: grimoire, bestiary, herbal, incunable. But the book knows its author. The book knows that it is doomed to be just one more mistranslated manual of the human heart. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. That's tremendous. It's fascinating, really, really fascinating hearing your own work read by other people. You find yourself thinking, God, that's good. And you also find yourself thinking, did I write that? And it's a fascinating process. And it's perhaps one we ought to learn from as poets and do it more often. I'm lucky because Liz is a great reader. She can make even my poetry sound fascinating. But this would be a challenge to her. This one's called Homecoming, and it's about my father. I didn't know my father for the first 5 years of my life. He was variously in hospital and working nights. My parents were a profound influence on me. My dad was born 2 months prematurely in above a photographer's shop. He went on to have peritonitis and then TB. And that's probably why he only lived till he was 91. But he was a great character and a wonderful man. Homecoming. As if 10 hours steelwork sweat, a pint of salt water a restorative, and milk sufficient to ward off lead poisoning was not enough, he'd cycle home. Halfway down the garden path, he'd cock his right leg over the saddle, gas match snapping back, no longer snapping like a jockey's whip into his side, and he'd trudge. I watched him place the bike amongst the paraphernalia of home maintenance and garden husbandry, and I'd say, fancy a couple of overs, or fancy 3 and in? Each night, I hoped he'd say yes. Each night, he did. Well done me for getting through that. I find that quite a difficult poem to read. Clare Shaw has been a good friend of mine for some years. We first met at Swindon when I read something that I'd written in a workshop to her, and she spoke to me in that way of hers, where she puts her head on one side and utters a stream of obscenities. And I thought, yeah, I'm in here. Claire, would you like to introduce what you're going to read for us, please?
Do I really do that? That's
yes,
not me.
You do.
John, it's just bloody lovely to be here. I'm quite intrigued that you and Liz are in different rooms. I'm assuming it's different rooms rather than different houses, but who knows? Different cities. Yeah, it's just absolutely wonderful to be here. I'm being really self-conscious now about not swearing, and notice how many times in the last 3 sentences I wanted to swear. I remember that workshop really, really clearly. I think, was it Swindon? Anyway, somebody said to me in advance, we were going through the list of people that were going to be in the workshop, and I think it was Kim Moore who went, that's Liz and John, they're lovely. And they were. And that was the kind of a start of a friendship, and more recently a friendship and working relationship, and it's just been such an honour to get to see No Guiding Star kind of come into being. There are so many reasons that I love John's work. I'm going to read one of them out. I never know how to say this woman's name. Muriel Rukiza. Yeah, someone's vaguely nodding, so we'll have that. This is one of my favourite bits of writing about writing. So she's talking about coming back from the Spanish Civil War. I think now of a boat on which I sailed away from the beginning of a war. It was night time, and over the deep, fertile sea of night, the voices of people talking quietly, some lights of the seacoast far away, some stars. It was the first moment of stillness in days of fighting. We had seen the primitive beginnings of the open warfare of this period. Men running through the silvery groves, the sniper whose gun would speak as the bullet broke the wall beside you, a child staring upwards at a single plane. More would come. In the city, the cars burned and blood streamed over the walls of houses and the horses shrieked. Armies formed and marched out. The gypsies, the priests in their purity and violence fought. Word from abroad was coming in as they asked us to meet in the summer leafy square and told us what they knew. They had seen how, as foreigners, we were deprived, how we were kept from and wanted, above all things, one, our responsibility. This was a stroke of insight. It was true. Now you have your responsibility, the voice said, deep, prophetic, direct. Go home. Tell your peoples what you have seen. I just love that. For me, that's the kind of central task of poetry. And I think that's what John's work does. And he writes about ordinary and extraordinary things with the same skill and the same passion and the same sort of extraordinary insight. So I'm going to read one of my favourite poems by John. There are many, but this one I love. It's called Total Immersion. One of the reasons I love it is it's about cave-in, and I'm kind of weirdly obsessed by cave-in. Sorry, my mind just did a weird somersault then, making sense of that statement. But it's something about the universality. John describes extraordinary things, but like all kind of poetry, all good poetry, he does that in a way. He describes the particular and makes it universal. So of course this is about caving, of course this is about death, of course it's about Parkinson's, of course it's about trauma, of course it's about Hebden Bridge being flooded, of course it's about having a baby or losing your mother. It's about everything. And it's also about caving. There are no guiding stars, no landmarks, just blackness and a tunnel you wear like a straitjacket. Your forearms drag your body forward and you exhale an expletive as your helmet strikes the roof or your battery jams you tight in the crawl. The air, stale as damp wool and bodies, has been breathed 1,000 times and the beauty you crawl for is forgotten. You plunge into water, lungs grasp at empty air, the skin shrinking cold saps the sap of mind and muscle. The roof, marrying malicious intent with the calmness you strive for, sinks beneath the surface. Those who went before are gone without sound or light. Alone, lonely and fueled by neither courage nor cowardice, but simply a lack of alternative, you snatch your breath and slip your head beneath the water. Honestly, it nearly made me go bog-eyed getting to that last line. I think that's such an amazing poem. And as usual, I had one planned and I've changed my mind because I think this has been just, 25 minutes of wonder, and I kind of want to respond to that with a very new poem. So I woke up this morning feeling shitty, and this event has just been exactly what I needed. And there's something about, even though we're all on a screen, God, there's still something so special about being able to see people and hear them and to feel ourselves touched in that way, if not physically. So this is a recent poem that I've written about what it's been like getting through lockdown. Day after a migraine. You shouldn't smoke, especially the day after a migraine. The smell of coal tar, very clean. There's a small room inside the self, a long way from pain. I can float there, boxed and untethered. I heard a choir, so clear I wanted to remember their names. My floors are freshly clean. There's tea on the hob, my scorched kettle. The neighbour plays tin whistle upstairs. He leaves wood on my doorstep. Do you want me to saw it? It's okay, I want the sun. My ex calls to check I'm okay. I'm okay, though I still shake. I want to say thank you, but we're not like that. A box of free stuff on the street. The sign says, free stuff. 2 of my friends are waiting for their mothers to die. Every migraine, I remember my mother's last days, how she bled from her eyes. Of course I can't get beyond it. There was an hour of sunshine, there was blossom. I cried because she could not see it. Whoever asked me then, are you okay, got the full story. Somewhere across the world, my sister is reading this. I wake in the night and look out at a desert, at a small town mapped in lights, a main street, a road leading to nowhere. A glass stares at me with empty eyes. It is very tired. There's no wind tonight, and I am weatherless. There will be sunshine again. At the top of Stake Pass, I found a tent, abandoned, a campfire. I could see them for miles, and I know that when the zombie apocalypse comes, this is where I'll pitch up, the sound of the river, clean water to bathe in each morning. This is how I'll survive. Cheers. Thank you, John. I'm so happy, and good luck with it all, mate. I hope it's the massive success it ought to be.
Thank you, Claire. Thank you very, very much. Thank you for that very moving reading. In the middle of my screen at the moment, there's a woman called Carol Bromley. And I just want to mention how much of a support she's been over the years. She's another one who comes up with the right word at the right time. It's generally something like, get on with it. I'm going to read, it's funny, I don't know if anybody else has this, but I've done this set list a dozen times and have changed it 4 times this afternoon. And I'm going to go for a poem called Lost Rook. It's a very short poem. Understanding nothing but her loneliness, she calls a canticle of despair. Returning to their feeding grounds, she looks, and knowing loss, croaks her desolation. If imagination could escape grief, it would dwell on eggless nests or the ghosts of fledglings. Without a mate, her singular lack of purpose reduces her at best to bystander. Thank you. Nadia, it's your turn to take over now.
Well, don't go anywhere, John. You got to answer my questions. Don't go, don't go. Oh, that was wonderful. Thank you, everybody, so much. I just want to say, I've been, John, Liz and I had a little chat about chat room yesterday. And I know John won't be seeing the messages that people have been writing, but I'll print them out and email them to him afterwards. So
Thank you.
He'll definitely see them. You'll definitely see them, John. The book, I put that up. So I have a few questions, and hopefully there'll be interesting questions for everybody else, because I have a feeling a lot of people know you better than I do. Hopefully they'll find out stuff or that they've never even asked you because they know you well. But anyway, we'll start with Roger Prestwich. That's where I'd like to start. Your English teacher. He dropped a copy of Spirit and Action, poems on Spirit and Action on your desk in the mid-60s. And you say that's where it all began. Can you tell me a bit about that?
Yeah, I think up until that point, I was a stranger to poetry. And that was just an amazing collection. I remember it had some poems which I would look down on a bit now, like But there were great poems like The Auctioneer, Only a Pound, said the auctioneer, only a pound as I'm standing here. I can remember them now. High Flight by John Gillespie McGee. How can you not be moved by that?
Wonderful.
And yeah, he was a great man. He was a real profound influence on my life. And the only thing that was bad about him was that he encouraged me to go into teaching.
Well, I guess he must have influenced that. So I've got a quick yes or no answer about, excuse me, about teaching English. Did teaching English help or hinder your creativity?
Helped it enormously. Enormously, particularly when I taught the sixth formers. There's one girl I taught, Laura Salt. I would think I'd escaped, and my office door would open and she would shout, "You got it wrong, Millsy." And she'd pile in and bring a load of the sixth formers in, and I'd have to get the head of sixth form in. I mean, we would hammer away at a poem or a bit of Shakespeare text or something like that, and it's fantastic. I think the mutual education was wonderful. And yeah, I thought that informed my creativity hugely.
Oh, fantastic. Okay, so next question. Caving and running. So I know those were, well, probably still are your passions. Can you tell me a bit about caving and running, or one or other?
Caving, I got into caving quite well as a student first time round, because I did a lot of climbing, and I thought, hey, that's really silly. why not do something sensible, but like crawl underground? So I took to that, and it was fascinating because you put yourself in some pretty hazardous situations, but you end up seeing some wonderful, beautiful, astonishing scenes, and you always get the impression nobody else has ever seen them before you.
I've had one experience when I went to Belize in March. I went with my niece, and I told her she likes doing lots of activities, and I said, fine, apart from, and I did a little list of things that I wouldn't do, and we ended up doing all of them. And one of them was crawling through a really tight cave. And I loved it. I loved it, actually. So what do you love about the caving, apart from seeing stuff that you feel nobody else
There's the element of adventure.
Yeah.
And you kind of know you're alive when you're on the edge of not being alive.
Yeah.
But running, as Helen will probably testify, I got into running after an injury put me out of football, and I started running as an effort to get fit again, and found I could do it. And there's a wonderful thing where you get so fit that your mind and your body disconnect. Your body takes over, and your mind is at one with itself. And you essentially meditate at 11 miles an hour, which is great fun.
Wow, that's fast. That's fast meditating. Now, we haven't, you don't know what I'm going to ask you, but you yesterday I was saying, what questions shall I ask you? And you said, surprise me. But you did want me to ask you about Parkinson's disease. So I'd like to ask you, looking back, right to the beginning of it, when and what were your first symptoms of Parkinson's disease? How old were you? And
probably, I don't know, 59, 60, something like that. It was the tremor which gave it away.
Did you know what it was earlier on, or did you not?
I was fairly confident that that's what it would be. But I mean, if in doubt, Google something and you get some answer or other, probably something quite ridiculous. But I was fairly confident that that's what I got. And in a way, I was quite lucky, because when I first got it, I thought, why me? And then within about a fortnight, I thought, well, why not? It's just hard luck, really. And but once you cross that Rubicon of accepting that you've got it and realizing it's nothing you've done to yourself or anything like that, it's just bad luck. It becomes easier to come to terms with the thing.
Because I was going to quote your poem "Nothing on My Mind," which starts with, "Nothing concentrates the mind like a serious illness. Although it is all-consuming, I have come to terms with it." And it must be very much, because I know that everybody who knows you and Liz know how vibrant and alive the two of you are, but you're doing that despite or with because or with living with chronic illness.
And it's one of those illnesses which never lets you forget it. It's a constant companion. The tremor is always reminding you of its presence, and it makes life harder than it should be at times. For example, writing is a difficulty for me physically. I used to concentrate on writing with a pen, and I like the kind of interface between mind and hand and pen and paper. I thought that was a very comfortable way of composing poetry, very organic. But that's been taken from me because one of the weird side effects of Parkinson's is your handwriting becomes minuscule. So I often can't read back what I've read, what I've written. And so I had to compose on the keyboard. Well, this thing is a random key selector. So I can aim for a key, and I can strike either of the two beside, the three above or the three below, which is great because I produce some really wonderful surreal poetry. And you have to rely on, well, you can't rely on autocorrect because that comes up with some ridiculous things. Debbie and Jim will know Stephen Seabridge, the Stoke Poet Laureate. Well, I wrote to congratulate him on that, and it turned out, congratulations on becoming Stoke Poet Laundrette, which I thought was great because laureates and laundrettes both wash their dirty linen in public, so I didn't change that.
That's wonderful.
Yeah, and his career's gone on from strength to strength. He's left the poetry behind and set up a laundry.
I don't believe that last bit.
The other thing about Parkinson's is it's the second most popular degenerative neurological condition, and very few people know about it. So it's great that poetry gigs and even in shops or something like that, I can help people gain a better understanding about it. And I don't want to be political, so I'm going to be. The average patients per neurologist in Britain is 87,000 patients per neurologist. In Stoke-on-Trent, in the Midlands Health Authority that I'm in, it's 130,000 patients per neurologist. In Europe, you know, that thing we've just left, it's 15,000 patients per neurologist.
That's horrific. That's absolutely horrific statistics, but really important to get out there.
Yeah, yeah.
I'd like to ask Jim and Claire and Helen if they've got any questions they'd like to ask you. Do unmute. Yep, Claire, please.
When can we next see you read, John? Have you got a timetable of gigs coming up?
I haven't got a timetable of gigs, no, but you can next hear me read later in this broadcast, shall we say.
That's great, but we'd like more. So let us know when there are more readings. Will
do, Claire, and thank you. Thank you.
Can I ask
Helen? Yeah, please, Helen.
I'm just interested, John. I don't know if you have this or not, but who is your ideal reader? People get asked a lot, like who are their favourite writers, but who do you imagine kind of really loving this book? Do you have someone in mind when you're writing from your audience?
Who would I like to read it? Is that the question you're asking, Helen?
Kind of, yeah.
Who could do it justice? So many people. But I'm going to go for Liz. I know that's playing safe and playing at home, but my wife is a very, very good reader, and she can extract the things that I think I've said rather than the things that I've actually written. And I sometimes think she's very, very perceptive, and she informs my poetry tremendously. She's a great writer in her own right and a great reader. Does that answer it, or is that waffle?
I think she meant the person who was going to physically read it, not read it out loud.
Oh, right. Anybody. Anybody. I don't really have a kind of target audience. The world. Boris Johnson. Don't know. Jim.
Hi, John. So what's happened to the rest of the poems that have been savagely removed from this? And obviously it's Nadia's fault. How did that process go? The selection, the dealing with your editor? Because having sort of had had a role of, you know, listening and watching to how you respond to being asked to change things and so on. I've always thought you're quite conscientious, but how did it go?
It was pretty simple and straightforward, Jim. I handed the poems over. Nadia went around them with a hatchet, and I said yes. But what is interesting is the poems that beforehand I would have said were certainties to go in, like, for example, the letter on behalf of Dr. Parkinson's discovery. I thought that's got to be a cert. That's got to be go in, and then when it comes to it, you think no, it doesn't fit. And I think perhaps sometimes the selection of work for a pamphlet is much harder than for a collection. You've got more freedom. And Nadia said to me about the acknowledgements, have you got any poems which have been published or won prizes? And I said, no, we've left them all out.
In my defence, that was your decision, wasn't it?
My decision.
Yeah, your decision to leave them out.
This is exactly the sort of conflict I was hoping to stoke by my question as well.
My decision in consultation with my editor, whom I rely upon and trust implicitly because she's publishing it.
I don't know what to say to that. I know what I'll say. Could you, John, could you read your one last poem from, I'll hold it up, from No Guiding Star by John Mills, you.
One final poem. I'll have to do one on Parkinson's. It's called And Then, and subtitled Parkinson's Progress. And then it shook, and then it staggered, and then it fell, and then it couldn't walk backwards, and then it couldn't reach, and then it couldn't fasten buttons, and then it was laughed at, and then it couldn't get dressed, and then it slurred, and then it shuffled, and then it was called drunk, and then it couldn't smell, and then it couldn't taste, and then it couldn't swallow, and then it couldn't move its feet, and then it couldn't write, and then it couldn't smile, and then it cried, and then it couldn't.
John, that's amazing. In a moment, I've had a request on, a lot of requests on chat room to unmute the audience in a minute. I don't know what they're going to do, but I'd just like to, before I unmute everyone, which I hope I can do. Oh, I don't know if I can. I think everyone will need to unmute themselves in a moment.
Yes.
Thank you. Oh yes, I think that is the way it has to happen, isn't it? But just before that, I'd like to quote from your poem, A Turn of the Screw, in which Parkinson's disease is speaking. And it says, I will tether your boat, your freedom, your spirit. And I'm sure the whole of the audience already knows that is completely untrue. Parkinson's disease has most definitely not tethered your spirit. Thank you, John, so much for allowing me to publish your pamphlet, for such a lovely reading. Thank you, Helen Mort, James Sheard and Clare Shaw, and thank you, lovely, lovely audience, for being here. And if you'd like to unmute yourselves, and we can clap and make a horrible noise.
Excellent. Yes. Oh, excellent.
Well done, John.
Well, thank you for giving me the clap I so richly deserve.
Bringing the tone down.